Before we begin, if you enjoyed the video, give us a like, a sub, hit any bells in reaching distance, and leave me a comment telling me how full of crap I am. This is one of my favourite memes. I am fascinated by how small things can lead to much bigger things. No plan, no will making it happen, just events leading to other events having big effects. Probably my favourite example of this is Jerry Ryan being cast in Star Trek Voyager, probably leading to the presidency of Barack Obama. I don't have time to go into that here, but it is quite a story. Anyway, the most important TV movie that you've never seen was Flight into Danger, an hour-long 1956 Canadian Broadcasting Corporation film. I know you've not seen it because, like so much of this year's TV, it doesn't seem to exist anymore. So unless you caught it on initial broadcast, or in an early repeat, you haven't seen it. It followed George Spencer, a World War II veteran. He's travelling from Winnipeg to Vancouver for work, when many passengers and some vital crew come down with food poisoning, and Spencer, who's never flown a plane this size, nor set foot in a cockpit in about a decade, has to land the plane, while being talked down by Captain Treleaven at Vancouver Airport. Now, a lot of you have already guessed that is Airplane, and yes, this eventually led to Airplane, but that's only a small part of the story. You see, this TV movie was successful. Incredibly successful. At the time, a reviewer even said it was the most successful TV program ever made. Anyway, this success led to bigger things. Foreign remakes in the UK, USA, Germany, and Australia. And as far as I can tell, those initial TV remakes are also lost, except the German version, which is on screen right now. Then in 1957, a feature film remake called 0 Hour was released. It changed Spencer's name to Ted Stryker.
My name is Ted Stryker. I'm a passenger on this airplane.
Added extra melodrama by giving him PTSD, relationship issues with his wife.
But it'll be different. Like it was in the beginning, remember?
I remember everything. It's all I've ever had to go on.
And a kid who interacted with the captain.
How'd you like to go up in the cockpit, Joey?
Could we?
20 years later, this version was caught by the Zaz team, Zucker, Abrams, and Zucker one night, and they thought it was hilarious. So hilarious, they bought the rights and remade it with added punchlines.
This guy doing the flying's had no airline experience at all. He'll be a menace to himself and everything else in the air.
Yes, birds too. It's a different kind of flying altogether.
It's an entirely different kind of flying.
What was it we had for dinner tonight?
Well, the main course was meat or fish.
Yes, I remember. I had lasagna.
Would you care for a drop, madam?
Certainly not.
You got that right. Airplane is not technically a spoof of 0 Hour. They knew they'd be covered by satire if they wanted to do a spoof, but they chose to go the extra mile and officially remake it.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Of course, Airplane made its little changes too. Captain Treleaven, tasked with talking Stryker down, was now Captain Rex Kramer.
Get me Rex Kramer.
Named after a character in the Kentucky Fried Movie.
Rex Kramer. Danger Seeker.
The Zaz team's last project before Airplane. It also made Stryker and his partner Elaine childless, giving the kid to this couple instead.
When can I see the cockpit, Dad?
Joey, I think the pilots are probably too busy flying the plane for that.
Who more closely resemble the Stryker and Elaine from 0 Hour. A bit if you squint. And they renamed Baird, the doctor on board, to Rumack.
My name is Baird. I'm a doctor.
Dr. Rumack says the sick people are in critical condition.
Honestly, I think the fact that out of all the silly names in Airplane, Ted Stryker originates with a serious version of the story is one of the funniest things about the film.
My name is Ted Stryker.
So this is the first important impact of Flight into Danger, Airplane. Its serious actors, deadpan but scattershot style comedy has been kind of ruined now, thanks to many terrible films. But it was revolutionary at the time, and this film codified an entire type of film comedy. The Zaz team's previous film, Kentucky Fried Movie, was really only half-formed. John Landis directed it, and he cast comedy actors, and had people give much broader performances than became the Zaz signature. You see, it was 0 Hour that convinced the Zaz team that comedy is much funnier when being delivered deadpan, by serious actors. And without Flight into Danger, no 0 Hour, so no Airplane. So the last 45 years of comedy would be very different. Because a lot of those 45 years is either films inspired by Airplane, or films pushing back against this style of comedy. But back to Aeroplane, more broadly for a moment. Usually when a piece of work gets adapted over and over and over again, the later adaptations go back to the original version, at least a bit. This is why, as a rule, I don't view new adaptations of existing works as remakes. For instance, Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings is not a remake of Ralph Bakshi's, even though it clearly is influenced as. But maybe the best example of this is when you compare John Carpenter's version of The Thing with the 50s film version and the original novel. John Carpenter's version is much more book accurate. Anyway, Aeroplane is one of the few exceptions to this rule, because it didn't go back to the original at all. You can actually observe the story evolving through Flight into Danger, the book, because the TV version's been destroyed, but I'll get into the book shortly, to 0 Hour, to Aeroplane. There is a lot of Flight into Danger in 0 Hour, and a lot of 0 Hour in Aeroplane, but there's not a lot of Flight into Danger in Aeroplane. For instance, there was a scene where the guy in charge of the airport started talking about smoking, and he didn't say,
"It's like I picked the wrong week to quit smoking."
And I got a little too upset. Anyway, check out Aeroplane, 0 Hour, and Flight into Danger, because seeing a story adapt and change over various iterations, like a game of telephone over decades, is fascinating. Plus, Aeroplane is still funny as hell. It really shows how funny and important it was that in the 25 years after the original Flight into Danger was released, there were about 8 versions internationally, most of which no longer exist. But then since Aeroplane, there's been none. It single-handedly killed a one-story franchise. Anyway, having seen Aeroplane more times than I can count, 0 Hour a couple of times, and listened to the audiobook version of Flight into Danger, one of the very few bits of dialogue to make it through all 3 incarnations intact is this hilarity.
The life of everyone on board depends upon just one thing. Finding someone back there who can not only fly this plane, but who didn't have fish for dinner.
The life of everybody aboard depends on just one thing. Finding someone back there who not only can fly this plane, but who didn't have fish for dinner.
Our one chance of survival depends on there being a person aboard this airline who's not only qualified to land it, but who also didn't have fish for dinner tonight.
Anyway, time to talk about Flight into Danger's second big impact. You see, it was so successful it was adapted into a novel, kickstarting first-time screenwriter Arthur Haley's novel-writing career. And some years later, he would return to airline peril with Airport, adapted into a film of the same name a couple of years later, which single-handedly created the 70s disaster fad. Disaster films have been around for decades by this point. Usually Deluge from 1933 is identified as the first disaster film, though personally I'd point to The End of the World from 1916. Anyway, it was the 70s disaster films, often by Irwin Allen, which kept the public's imagination. Without Airport there to relaunch the genre, the chances are it might be forgotten today. Meaning that without Flight into Danger, no modern disaster movie, and we'd all be so much poorer. But not only that, without the 70s disaster movie, the chances are that famous, legit, important actors wouldn't have been convinced that it's okay to appear in expensive schlock. Without Flight into Danger, without the disaster film, the blockbuster might be very different, if it existed at all. You see, what was the first blockbuster? Jaws. And what was Jaws? A tale of nature killing people. A very localized, very small disaster film. At the very tail end of the disaster craze. Would it have been made without that craze? Maybe. Maybe not. And if not, so many things would be different. Spielberg wouldn't have taken off the way he did. And that guy dragged Hollywood in his wake for decades. Whole franchises wouldn't exist without him. The entire film industry today would be unrecognizable. Anyway, back to Flight into Danger's many remakes. There were actually 3 made in the USA, the TV remake that aired 6 months after the original Canadian TV movie, then 0 Hour in 1957, and a 1971 TV version renamed Terror in the Sky, made to cash in an Airport success. That one featured Doug McClure and Roddy McDowall.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And stop calling me Shirley.
And Terror in the Sky is a Flight into Danger remake, not 0 Hour. You can tell because the melodrama's been turned a bit down and there's no kid. Plus he's called George Spencer in that, not Ted Stryker. But over in the UK, things got a little bit spicy. The BBC initially just rebroadcast the original version, and then they made their own version, which, like the original, is now lost. But the BBC were so impressed with the original that they actually poached the producer from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation and gave him a job and a promotion. That producer's name was Sidney Newman, And eventually, part of his job was creating shows, and one of the ones that he created for the BBC was a little thing called Doctor Who.
So, what do you think?
So no Flight into Danger, no Doctor Who, and so many things will be different. Sci-fi, the UK's national identity, Tumblr, my YouTube career. Doctor Who is popular now, but even decades ago it was quietly influencing generations of people writing TV and film. So no Flight into Danger, and suddenly sci-fi is practically unrecognizable, in big and small ways. Just a random example, they'd have to call The Matrix something else, because it was named after The Matrix in Doctor Who. A digital reality that you can enter.
Amplified paratropic computations.
Brain cells.
Yes. Trillions of electrochemical cells in a continuous matrix.
And we're not finished yet. You see, the success of Flight into Danger is one of the things that got Americanized in its star, James Doohan, and likely helped him get the role of Scotty in Star Trek.
Keep your f***ing hands off me!
Once again, no Flight into Danger, and suddenly a lot of things are different. You see, when he was cast, he was allowed to choose the nationality and accent of his character. So no Doohan, no Scotty. Doohan was also one of the big reasons that Star Trek the Animated Series was financially feasible. Because he could do voices, he regularly played multiple characters every episode, and not just small parts, meaning they basically got several actors for the price of one. And of course, the animated series was one of the things that kept Trek alive until it was finally relaunched with a motion picture. Would the animated series have been made without Doohan's cost-cutting? Maybe not. Would Trek have stayed alive without the animated series? Maybe, but we don't know. And lastly, because of his interest in voices, he was asked to create snippets of the Klingon and Vulcan languages for Star Trek the Motion Picture. So now I need to talk about conlangs, constructed languages. These have been made for centuries by nerds of all kinds, but in modern normie sense, it's mostly used for entertainment. Klingon wasn't the first conlang, not even the gold standard for conlangs, Tolkien's Elvish was first, but Klingon was the first mainstream normie exposure for a lot of people. Mark Okrand and others have done a lot of expanding over the years, but no Doohan, no Klingon as we know it, maybe none at all, because again, that was the producers using Doohan for cheap work. So without him hanging around, they might not have bothered. And without Klingon growing, flourishing, becoming an actual language with Shakespeare plays.
And
heavy metal. Would Game of Thrones thought to put the work into High Valyrian? Would Peter Jackson have put so much Elvish into his Lord of the Rings? Honestly, I don't know. Now, obviously, the connections and dominoes have got a little bit vague towards the end, but like the title says, this is the most important TV movie you've never seen. A true load-bearing structure of pop culture. Not bad for a little TV production from a first-time scriptwriter, huh? Oh, wait a second, I never even mentioned the Czech radio adaptation. Oh well, I'm pretty sure that doesn't exist anymore. Very few versions of this story still do. Anyway, if you thought this video was interesting and want to see more, then sub or check out the Patreon. We have cool stuff there.
I don't know, there are 37 people back there. All we have to hope for is that one of them knows how to fly a plane and hasn't had chicken for dinner.
Combo breaker!